Hi there. Thanks for joining me here on Conversations for Yoga Teachers. I'm your host, Karen Fabian, the founder of Bare Bones Yoga and the creator of the Momentum Magic Method, the way to become a confident teacher, one who effortlessly walks around the room, shares clear cues, easily builds sequences, and speaks from her heart, sharing authentically with her students. On the podcast, you'll hear anatomy lessons, stories from teachers, interviews with others in the field, and a dose of personal growth, because having a strong, healthy mindset is such an important piece of being a confident teacher. In addition to the podcast, follow me on Instagram and TikTok at Bare Bones Yoga for daily videos. And you'll also see a new link on both of my profiles, my Stan Store link, a literal vending machine for you to select how you best want to be supported as a teacher. There, you'll find links to the podcast, free resources, and other ways I can help you be the best teacher you can be. And don't forget, every single week, in addition to recording you a new episode of this show, I also teach yoga classes and free workshops specifically for yoga teachers. The only way to get your invite is to be on my mailing list. You can do that simply by going to my website, barebonesyoga.com, and down at the bottom, entering your email in the box. Here we go with today's show. Hi there. Welcome to Conversations for Yoga Teachers. I'm your host, Karen Fabian, and this is episode 310. I'm recording this episode on August 15th, 2024, and this will go live on the 19th. And this is an interview episode. I'm going to share with you in a moment the guests that I have on the show. And I'm really excited for you to hear this conversation, because just as Kelly mentions in the conversation, and we recorded it today, it's so great. It's so much fun when yoga teachers can get together and have a conversation. It's oftentimes something that we don't have a chance to do. I know for me, teaching public classes for all the years that I did that, it was sort of a coming and going. You sort of were ships in the night passing. And so whenever I have the chance to have a conversation with a colleague, it is just so much fun. And there's just so much opportunity there for growth. So I'm really psyched for you to hear this episode. So that's really, kind of the what's ahead. And I want to just give you just a brief overview of Kelly. Kelly came onto the show in November of 2021. We mentioned that at the beginning of this episode, and I'm so glad that we have this opportunity to connect again, because in the span of the last time we were together, November 2021, she's written 2 books. She has continued to build her brand, Yoga for You, and our conversation today is about what inspires her to teach, to run her podcast, to offer the kind of content that she does, to train teachers in her area of expertise. And I don't want to give away too much. Kelly is a 500-hour registered yoga teacher. She is similar to me, a Yoga Alliance continuing education provider. She is the host of 2, not just 1, 2 podcasts, the author of 2 books, and she travels internationally leading trainings for yoga teachers. So please, at the end of the episode, take a look at the show notes where you will find her website link, yogaforyouonline.com, and you can go there for everything that we talk about today. And there will be definitely things I'm sure you will hear and you'll think, oh, I want to check that out. And so the link, I've put it right in the show notes so you can get to it really easily. As I close this quick intro before we hop over to my conversation with Kelly, I just want to remind you, if you didn't listen to the last episode, which of course I would love for you to do, you'll get a lot out of that one. I did mention a back to school special I am running on my signature program, the Yoga Anatomy Blueprint Learning Program. And so if you are a graduate of a 200-hour teacher training, you've graduated from that training and you're out there teaching at least one paid class a week, you are exactly the kind of teacher this program was built for. It's designed to help you build your confidence, help you learn how to share cues clearly, how to easily build sequences that your students will love, and most importantly, how to feel more empowered and confident when you teach. And so that's what the program is all about. I would love to have you join. And you can always just send me an inquiry on Instagram and just send me a quick DM and just say, hey, I want to know about the back to school special. And I'll tell you all about that. I'm running that only during the month of August 2024. Okay, so with that, we are going to hop over to my conversation with Kelly Smith. I hope you love it.
Hello, hello. I'm in my little closet hiding
Oh,
from my
sure.
children.
Yes, I remember this from last time.
Yes,
Wonderful.
it
Hey,
is.
work.
It's my place. How are you?
Good, good. How are you doing?
Good. I'm doing well. I love that blue on you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Yes, the bright colors.
I think it really suits you.
Awesome. Well, I'm so glad we have a chance to kind of do a part two, but I feel like since
Yeah.
the part one was a while ago, it might be nice to just start with maybe a recapping, kind of a getting acquainted. I know that when we met the first time, I was I don't know, probably under 200 300 episodes. So I probably got some new people here who haven't dug into the archives and heard that one. So I thought, we could start with sort of a who are you and what are you doing? I kind of refreshed my memory and took a look at your website and your social media and your Instagram. And I know you're doing a whole bunch of things. And I saw a recent trip you took on there to Ireland, it
Yeah.
looks like. So yeah, so I'd love to just have a conversation about how things are going and maybe start out by letting the listener know a little bit about you.
That sounds amazing. Thank you so much for that. So, anyone, if we haven't met before, I'm Kelly Smith. I'm the founder of Yoga for You. I'm an ERYT 500 and a YACEP. I'm also the host of the podcasts Mindful in Minutes and Meditation Mama, which are guided meditation podcasts. And since we last spoke, I am now a mother of two. So, a whole lot has happened since the last time we connected, and I've really been just focusing on the things that bring me joy in my business, also really refining what teaching yoga looks like to me now that time is so much more limited, like such a
Yeah.
precious resource time becomes when you have kids.
Yeah.
And yeah, I've written a couple of books since we last spoke. One
Mm-hmm.
called Meditation for the Modern Family, one called You Are Not Your Thoughts, which is a book and journal for meditation and anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
And I am just recently now, this is part of what inspired me to connect back with you, Karen. I'm slowly coming out of what I lovingly refer to as the troll hole, which is where I go after I have a baby. And I just, don't really leave my house. I don't really see adults. I don't mind the troll hole, but I do miss just getting to talk to people about things that we love, having conversations. And I don't know, I just thought, what's Karen up to? And so, so I wanted to connect with you, and I realized
Yeah.
it's been so long.
Yeah, I can't believe it's been two babies' time since we last
Oh,
talked
I
because
know.
I didn't actually look back. Sometimes I do this because I do have repeat guests and I didn't look back at the date. So I'm guessing it must have been 2021.
I think it was either, it may have even been
Because
late
2020
2020.
would have been like COVID, like really
Yes,
in COVID. And I sort of don't feel like we were talking then, but it must
yeah,
have been the very beginning of 2021, sometime
it
there. So
could have
I
been
will
it.
look back.
Yes, It was
to,
somewhere around there. It may have been very late 2020 because I think if I recall, I think I was really pregnant when we
yeah.
last spoke.
Okay.
And so that would have been like really late
Yeah. So you've
2020.
had two whole humans since we last.
Oh,
Yeah. And I love, you describing your life and also what you do, because I feel like the overlap of those two and how to overlap those two is such an important conversation to have with moms, with people listening who also are, maybe their overlap is a job and teaching yoga, or being a mom and teaching yoga, or, you mentioned your book on anxiety and just managing anxiety and also teaching. So there's sort of these different amalgams depending on who's listening and what their situation is. And let's kind of start out with, maybe the one that you're living, because that will give us, your expertise on how it's been for you. How has, you know, being a mom times two impacted you in terms of your business? And the last time we talked a lot about, you were training teachers, I believe you were, doing teaching. So tell me a little bit about how that shift has been.
it's been such an interesting shift. And I would say it's been different with each child. So my oldest is 3 and my youngest is 10-ish months. So still very much like a baby. And I would say that I learned different things with each child. And I
Mm,
also have had less time after each child is born. But I would say after my son was born, I very much I had to really redefine what success meant to me. And
mhm,
also, I had to look at my business objectively and say, okay, what's working? What's not working? What is it time to release? And then what can I realistically do with the time that I have that I feel like not only brings me joy, but brings kind of that quote success and abundance to my business. And
mhm,
so at the time, because it was COVID times, I wasn't doing a ton of traveling. But after every kid, I've done even less traveling. But what that's looked like is doing more things that I can do on my time that I can schedule in advance. So I've really started to move away from teaching a lot of just regular studio classes because also, I mean, as you know, a kid is always sick.
yeah.
Someone has the, you know, child care is inconsistent, whatever it is, something always is popping up.
Mhm,
And so I've really been focusing on things like I do teacher trainings, like meditation teacher training, but it's now online, done at your own pace. I'm
mhm,
working on converting my signature yoga nidra teacher training to the same format. So
mhm,
things where then I can review people's final projects at the time where I'm present and can give it my full attention,
mm,
knowing that that might be at 5 o'clock in the morning. It might also
right.
be 8 o'clock at night. It might be at, 12 because both kids are napping at the same time. Who knows? Podcasting is another thing that can be done on your own time. Also, writing a book, creative writing. And so it's
Mhm,
been really interesting because I used to log a lot of like on the mat, eye to eye, in person hours with my students. And I had to really redefine what I wanted to do and also what my definition of success was. I had a hard time and I'm curious, Karen, if you've ever experienced anything like this where, it can be hard to feel like you're doing less or quote
yeah.
doing less, like put in less hours and somehow you
Mhm,
feel like that means that you're truly just doing less or that it's less important to you, but I think it's really about finding what works for you and finding a way. I don't think work-life balance really exists. I think it's about learning how can they coexist.
mhm, mhm, mhm,
And so I've really been playing around with that and changing a little bit of my business model so that I can be the mom that I want to be
mhm,
and also still continue to breathe life into my yoga business
mhm.
and make that work. I don't think I've fully cracked the code yet, but I'm still working on it. And it's just been so interesting. But I don't know, have you ever had like big life changes like that, Karen, where you feel like you had to really sort of look at your business and be like, what is important to me? What do I want to focus my time and energy on?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I feel like for me, I'm in a little bit of a different phase of my life, and that's causing me to kind of regroup. I'm going to be 60 in September. I have had a long history of working for myself, what I do when I work for myself, my program for yoga teachers, my focus on training yoga teachers specifically around anatomy and building their confidence and cueing and sequencing skills, that continues to be kind of the through line. But similar to yourself, I have sort of shifted a little bit around how I do it. I still really believe in the one-to-one model. So even though I could scale it more by making it 100% virtual slash self-study, I really still love and get joy out of the one-to-one coaching calls that are part of the model. So I still have that as, part of the framework for how I offer it. And yeah, I mean, I think for me, I have, shifted a lot in terms of what does my day look like. I really prioritize nutrition and meditation and movement so much more. Like I was thinking the other day, if I ever had a full-time regular job like I used to have many, many years ago, I would probably have to get up at 4 in the morning to be able to do all the things that I do. Like that really I have the fortunate lifestyle that I've been working for myself long enough that I can blend these things into my schedule very differently than my before entrepreneurial lifestyle when I had a 9 to 5 job. So yeah, I love what you're saying about the redefining. It's not just redefining your schedule. It's also what you were saying about redefining what success looks like to you, which, especially for all of us as we're on social media and we see TV and we, kind of see these images of what success should look like. And then we have questions about, well, my schedule's not working right now if I try to keep all these balls in the air. So how did you find that redefining process? How did that feel in your body? Like, did you feel like any anxiety coming up as you were letting things go and that sort of thing?
Definitely. And before I dive into that, I just want to I want to tell you this is that even though we haven't connected in a while, I'm
Mm.
still a lurker. I lurk around what you're doing, Karen. And I have to say, I meant to tell you this when we were chatting, but I think the work that you do specifically around anatomy is so phenomenal. So if anyone's
Oh,
listening and they haven't checked that
awesome.
out, I think that's so
Thank you.
phenomenal and missing. But anyway, so I think that often, but I never take the time to tell you that. So I had to tell you before I forget.
Thank
You know, I
you.
mean, I felt uncomfortable. Absolutely. I
Mm.
think change is uncomfortable. Like
Yeah.
just like feeling like sometimes just like breathing. Sometimes you have an inhale, sometimes you have an exhale,
Mm.
right? But even in that expansion period, that big breath in, that
Mm.
can feel uncomfortable. In that, expansion, that exhale period of life, that can be uncomfortable too. Also, sometimes staying stagnant for too long, that's uncomfortable. I don't
Mm.
think uncomfortable is bad. I think it's a sign of change. And then it's up to you. And I also like meditation so important to me, such a useful tool during this time, being able to turn inward, look within, drown out the noise because, there's so much noise and it's so easy to compare yourself to others.
Mm.
And for me, the biggest piece was learning how to not compare a former version of myself with completely
Mhm.
different circumstances to a current version of
Mm.
myself and to say, oh, well, you know what? Before kids, before COVID, I was doing this and that
Yes.
and that. And I was putting this many hours in every single day. And now I'm a mother of two. I'm the primary parent. And there's some days where I just have to accept that that's just gonna have to wait till tomorrow. I don't
Right.
know. I don't have time to get to it today.
Right.
And learning how to manage that and recognizing that comparing an old version of myself to my current circumstances is never helpful. So
Mhm.
that whole process did feel uncomfortable, but I think it really challenged me to look at what I was doing objectively.
Mm.
And this is something that I really encourage people to do, especially when you work for yourself. I think you put so much heart and soul into every single thing that you
Mm.
do, and you want everything to, of course, be a huge success, but it's not.
Mm.
There's, ideas that you will come up. I'm sure if you've experienced
Yes.
this too, you come up with a workshop or a training or
Right.
even, a retreat location and it just doesn't sell or it doesn't
Mhm.
fill or
Mhm.
you pick the week that everyone already has their vacations planned, whatever it is. And so it really challenged me to look objectively at not only what was working, but then to try to tune into my students and my audience and ask them for feedback as to what they want, knowing what I was going to create was going to be with less time. So I wanted to be more focused and creating something and following like what felt good to me. And also, think it helped me build a better relationship with my students and my audience to understand their needs better so that I
Mhm.
could be more focused and more informed when I did have that time to pour into being a business owner, being a yoga teacher, meditation teacher, podcaster, all of those things.
Got it. Yeah, and listening to you talk about this, I sort of had this vision in the back of my head of, or in my mind of when you clean out your closet and you sort of do the spring cleaning and you sort of make the piles of things to donate and that sort of thing. And I'm wondering, a lot of the conversations I have with yoga teachers, they're looking to sort of define who they are as a teacher. And of course, everybody is influenced by what they see online and what their perception is of what's going to be successful, like we're talking about. Um, when you were going through this process of sort of redefining, how did you know what were sort of the pillars of like your mission or what was important to you, like how you wanted people to perceive you? Not even that you wanted to control their perception, but how did you know what things you wanted to keep to be part of what defines the kind of yoga teacher you are?
Oh, I love that question. I think so I kind of think of these pillars, as you will, as kind of in two different categories. So there's always been like the core of yoga for you, and then so many things fall underneath that umbrella. The
Mhm.
podcasts, the
Mhm.
trainings, the events, the retreats, all of that kind of fall under the yoga for you umbrella. That to its core will have certain pillars that will probably never change because it just kind of is me, like believing that yoga and meditation is not a one size fits all approach.
Mhm.
Really focusing on creating like meditation, simple, grounded, short meditations that help people with really tangible things, right? Like I'm a busy mom of however many, and like my anxiety is really getting in the way. Can you just create something for me that's 10 minutes to just help me calm my nervous system? Like that
Mhm.
really just foundational piece of helping people build a strong foundation and feel better. The softer sides of yoga, restorative yoga, yoga nidra, things like that. Those are pillars of just like what I stand for as a yoga teacher, as the founder of Yoga for You. That's like the core pillar. And then I think about these other things that kind of and I loved your imagery of cleaning out the closet because it's so true. And I also think when you do clean out your closet, there's like those jeans that you haven't worn for like 5 years, but you hold them and you look at them and you remember all the things that
Mhm.
happened when you held them, even though you know it's time to just let them go,
Yeah.
that it's, but you still have like those memories. I almost think about what I do as kind of like the solar system. So I have like the sun, and
Mm.
that is not going to change anything else. But then I do have these other planets that are kind of, orbiting around the sun that can change, that can be in different phases. But
Mm.
the actual sun, the core of it, that's not going to change.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, I don't know. Does that answer your
Yeah,
question?
it does. I mean, it's sort of, I'm curious too, when you talk about the main, and just to kind of, for the listener, for instance, like your website is yogaforyou.com, right? So that became, your stake in the ground, so to speak, in terms of the kind of the defining brand. So why don't you speak a little bit to what's behind that? What does yoga for you mean? Because especially when you talk about the softer side of yoga and the meditations that you have, and of course your podcast is focusing on meditation.
Yeah, it's almost all guided meditations, a little bit of, some instruction and deep dives here and there,
Yeah,
but
so
mostly just guided practices.
yeah, so this whole, kind of packaging in your own package of yoga is your own way of saying to the world, this is what I'm offering you. So why don't you describe, when you think of yoga for you, what does that mean? What's behind that? What's the messaging behind that?
Okay, thank you for asking me that question, mostly because it's now challenging me. Like, I feel like this is such a good exercise for all of the yoga teachers out there to like go back to that and be like answer this question for yourself
Yeah.
because I started yoga for you in over 10 years ago at this
Yeah.
point. And so anyone who's been practicing for a long time and you go back to those days and be like,
Mhm.
what do I really stand for? What did I stand for that still stands true?
Exactly.
So I love this exercise. Thank you for giving
Mm.
me the opportunity to do it.
Sure.
The whole thing started of yoga for you was because it's yoga for you, the student, not yoga for me, the teacher. And
Uh-huh.
I felt like at the time, over a decade ago, that there weren't a lot of teachers that were meeting their students where they were at. They were teaching. I don't feel this way necessarily now. I think we've kind of shifted a little bit away from kind of like the guru mindset, from the,
Mm. Mm.
look at all of my knowledge, look how, bendy I am. I'm going to teach you so that you can come up to this level that I'm at.
Mm.
I personally, that doesn't align with me. I
Mhm.
think it's our job as teachers, and my job as a teacher, to meet my students where they're at and to create yoga, right? So that includes all the limbs,
Mhm.
pranayama,
Mhm.
asana, we have meditation, the yamas, niyamas, all of that for you, not for me. And so
Mhm.
that's why I named it yoga for you. And I still love to embody that I am very much just, I'm still collecting tools for my toolbox, but maybe I've been collecting, for a decade or two longer than you have. And then I love to then show people, you know, oh, you just picked up this tool. Let me show you how to use it. And
Mhm.
to really meet my students where they're at. And I joke that I'm like, for many people, the gateway drug of meditation, like my podcast, but I love that. And I wear that as a badge of honor because I love to be people's first, like, little dip of the toe into meditation, where the people who are like, oh, I see these, meditation gurus on Instagram. And I'm like, I can't go live in a cave and meditate for 4 hours a day. And I
Mhm.
don't do that either. And I love to be like, no, no, I want to meet you where you're at and help you just feel better and feel successful in a way that's realistic to your life. So that looks like maybe meditating for 10 minutes. Maybe that looks like, vinyasa doesn't agree with your body. Why don't we dabble in some restorative yoga?
Mhm.
And it's really, for me, has always been about creating yoga for you, the student, not creating yoga that fulfills like me, the teacher, and really taking that sort of ego piece out of it.
Mhm. Got it. So when you began 10 years ago with this mission, this vision in mind, what did it look like then? Were you teaching public classes and you were focusing your classes on this style?
Yes. So I started, the first yoga for you was when I lived in rural Missouri. I'm in Minneapolis now for like the second time. I grew up here and then, whatever. We left for my husband's work for quite a while. It took us a few places. Now we're back. But when I lived in Missouri, it really was kind of this like one bar, one Walmart town. And this is where I sort of developed this like yoga for you ethos, if you will, because so many of my students, and all I was doing, I was doing the classic like sun up to sun, not even before the same sun came up and well after the sun went down. I was teaching classes, doing private clients, going to the local library, I was kind of like the town yoga teacher in a way. I ended up opening a yoga studio there, but it was just day in and day out, hitting the mat, a class or a private session or a pop-up class. Or if I wasn't doing that, I was emailing, my husband was there for med school, emailing the med school and saying, hey, I know I already have a class on Friday nights, but hey, what do you think about adding one on Tuesday night? And it was
Mhm.
just that thing I think a lot of teachers do in the beginning is we
Mhm.
just start teaching a bajillion classes and just a million hours on the mat teaching to make ends meet. That's what I was doing. But
Mm.
that's where I really developed this idea that it's yoga for you and not for me, because so many of my students had never done yoga before. A lot of them had to kind of push themselves beyond this belief that yoga and meditation were against their religion, which was something I hadn't quite come across until then. And working with a lot of people where their main concern, things where they were like, I want to be able to tie my shoes without needing help. That's the amount of mobility I want to gain. I want to be able to tie my own shoes. And that's where I really developed like such a deep love for my students, but also realizing this has nothing to do with me. Like this
Mhm.
is all about them. And then I was just really, kind of pounding the pavement, teaching anywhere. And, at one point my goal was to take 2 days off a month. That was my goal. And I rarely met that goal. This is like my early 20s. So I had that like
Yeah.
stamina versus now, like I'm creeping towards my mid 30s.
Yeah.
But that's what the business model looked like at that time when I was starting.
Mhm. Mhm. And then at some point you shifted things to more of an online.
Yes. So after that, when we moved again for a different part of medical school, I sold the studio, closed my doors. I thought, I don't know, this is it. And we moved to then Michigan, and we knew we were only going to be there for about a year and a half. And anyone listening, all my yoga teachers out there, we all know how long it takes to build up those classes, to
Yeah.
build up that following. And I mean, a year and a half, that's like a drop in the bucket when we talk
Yeah.
about really building your yoga community. So that's when I shifted pretty much everything to what I now call location independence. That's when I started my podcast 7 years ago. I started taking my trainings. By the end of kind of my tenure, with my studio, I was doing like yoga teacher trainings, continued ed trainings. I started kind of taking those on the road. And so I would reach out to studios kind of all over the US, also internationally, and say, hey, would you ever want to host a yoga need your teacher training? And I started doing these pop ups kind of all over. I did teach a little bit locally, but that's when I really started focusing. It's also when I started doing retreats on things where I could do that from truly anywhere. I could live anywhere and keep that same business model.
Got it. Got it. Yeah. I mean, I like to have these kinds of conversations when I have teachers on the podcast to give the listener an idea of what does being a yoga teacher look like. It doesn't always look like what you were describing before. I lived through that phase myself, and I loved that phase. I mean, I live in Boston, and I have so many memories of the past, I don't know, 20 some odd years of teaching, and
Mhm.
going across the Mass Ave Bridge or walking through a back bay, or like sometimes I'll be in the car and I'll be driving and I'll be like, I know that brownstone from all the times I would pass on Sundays after teaching my 12:30 on the way to my 12:30 and my home. So yeah, and still you've created your own way of being out there in the world. And so I love to kind of get into some of the details so people listening can hear there are other ways to do it. Like, it doesn't always have to be the model of teaching in-person classes.
Yes. And I will say from my own experience, and also now when I work with other teachers and kind of this more of like a mentorship capacity, that model that I was doing, like I was burnt out. By the
Yeah,
time I closed my studio doors and I was saying, hey, my goal is to take 2 full days off a month,
right.
which is like
Crazy.
bananas.
Yeah,
Oh, I truly was like dead. Like by the time we got to Michigan, I was like ill because I went from, working 80, 90 hours a week
right,
to basically being unemployed again,
right.
and then just being like nothing. And I was physically ill for a
Mhm,
while. And I know a lot of teachers struggle with that. I hear it from a lot of teachers. We all go through that phase of
mhm,
saying yes to everything. And then before we know it, we're running across town 10 times a day to make all these
right.
classes. But that is like usually a one-way ticket to burnout. And so something I hear a lot that I've not only experienced, but I hear from my students is that they're trying to find ways, even if it's not totally going away from teaching classes, because I still love doing that too. But how can I do that without having to spin my wheels constantly all day long, teaching 6 days a week,
Right.
all of this and craving a way to still be a teacher, but not get burnt out.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, and I can certainly say from my own experience, but I've talked to some teachers as well who went through a shift when COVID closed all the studios. It was that overnight. Like for me, March 13th, 2020 was my last public class. And then that was Friday. And then by that Monday, 13, 14, 15, 16, everything was like the official word had come down. All the studios were closed. So that was sort of my Michigan moment. Like all of a sudden it was like 60 to 70% of my schedule was gone overnight. I still had my online program. And then luckily, many people wanted to do things online because they couldn't do anything in person. So I had something already in place that could ramp up. But I find it interesting, when you talk about how your schedule shifted and how you were looking at yourself and prioritizing your health. And I agree with you. I think many times that single threaded running around teaching classes, there are advantages to it. There's different like things we get from that as a teacher. Obviously, being in the room with human beings is a different vibe than doing things online. And we also want to just keep aware of, is this actually working for us? So
Mhm.
I totally get that. The other thing that I heard you mention, and I just want to bring this up as well, is you have written some books, right? So you've got some books out there. I've written some books. I've got some books out there. So that is like a different avenue as well. So tell us a little bit about what inspired you to write these books, especially in terms of the topics, because I'm curious, these are topics that I'm sure, didn't just drop out of the sky. You have some meaning. They have some meaning to you.
Yeah, so they definitely didn't drop out of the sky. But what I will say is I kind of came to writing books um, in a way that's a little bit unique. So, Mindful in Minutes, my podcast, it is, I think because it's guided practices, it actually, the funny thing is, speaking of COVID, my life changed like March of 2020 for the better and for worse. There was one week where I found out I was pregnant with my son. And then a few days later, I had to cancel. I had all these trainings coming up in the UK, like a few weeks after that. And, all the planes are grounded. If we're all, I don't want to like re-traumatize anyone. We all
Right.
know what that was like. I had to pull the plug. I remember I lost $12,000 in one day because all the venues that I had secured, all of that, everyone was saying, oh, well, we'll put, because no one knew what was going on. So they weren't saying, oh, it's because of COVID. Yeah, we're going to cancel this. We'll refund you, whatever, whatever. They're saying, oh, well, you can postpone. Oh, well, we don't know if maybe you'll be able to still follow through on this. But I knew I'm pregnant. This is what's going on. I'm not going to be able to. Anyways, I lost $12,000 in one day. And then I keep a spreadsheet of all my metrics that I've been filling out every single week for the last like 6 years. I remember a few days later, it was Monday morning. I was filling out my spreadsheet, feeling really defeated, feeling sick because I was pregnant. And I remember I was filling in my podcast downloads for that day. And I checked probably 5 times. I was like, is this software broken? And I remember in one week, this is not a joke, Karen, you'll appreciate this as a podcaster. I had 250,000 downloads in a week in one 7-day period. I almost fell out of my chair. And that's why I was like, oh my gosh, is this software broken? Did I like type in the wrong dates? And from that day on, that podcast, Mindful Minutes, changed my life. So I became an author by having a publishing house come to me and say, hey, we love what you're doing with Mindful in Minutes. Have you ever considered writing a book? We would love to help support you in that journey, which I know for anyone who has written a book, you know this, Karen, that's not the norm where a publishing house comes to you and says, hey, we love what you're doing. Can we help support you in writing a
Right.
book? And so, however, something that has always been a dream of mine is to write a book because I have ADHD, but I also have dyslexia. And it was something when I was young, I really struggled to learn how to read. I actually refused to read for like 6 weeks in first grade. I remember my mom was so mad. She was like, what do you mean you're just refusing to read? Anyways, that was something that felt so unattainable to me.
Mm.
And so when that opportunity fell in my lap, I realized what a blessing it was. And also, I was like, okay, this is my opportunity to do something I've always dreamt of and to prove to myself that it can be done.
Mhm.
And so I was, really scared, but also really excited about that opportunity. So the first book, Meditation for the Modern Family, is one that we kind of came up with the concept together. It actually started as a book that I envisioned would just be for mom navigating those first few years of motherhood, because that's what I knew best.
Mm.
And they were like, okay, yes, we love this idea, but we also think, could you expand it to include, families in general? So things for little kids, for adolescents, for teens, and for caregivers too. And so we kind of worked together to create the concept of the first book. And so it started with my framework. And then, they brought some input and said, hey, we actually think this would be a stronger idea to do this. And so we worked on that together. And I'm so proud of how it turned out because now that my kids are a little bit older, I can see, they were right that
Mm.
there is so much more to a family. And so the way it's broken up, it's like the first section is kind of meditation 101. How do you talk to your kids about meditation? How do you weave it into the family system? All of that. Then the main chunk of it is there's like 35 different chapters. Each one has a different topic. And it's all things that pop up in the family system, things like self-esteem, resilience, anxiety, navigating change. And then it has, reflections, teaching, and all that. And then 3 guided practices, one for your little ones, one for your adolescents, and then one for like teens and adults. And
Mhm.
then mantras to support that. So anyone who has kids, and an issue pops up in your house, like if one of your kids has anxiety, you're all kind of working on it together. It impacts the whole family system. So that's kind of how this, book helps support that. And there's sections on the growing family, so prenatal meditations, and then meditations to help support your partnership. if you're doing that. So that I'm really proud of. Also, I've heard a lot of great feedback from yoga teachers specifically that teach like kids yoga, even if they don't have kids, and they're like, "Oh my gosh, I love that." I
Yeah.
can just pull a practice out. It's hard sometimes to
Yeah.
find resources for kids, especially that adolescent age group.
Yeah.
So that's the first book. And then the second book was really came from my heart because it was inspired by and you didn't know me yet, or I guess it's happened after you knew me, but I had debilitating postpartum anxiety with my son. And the irony is not lost on me that a meditation teacher had crippling anxiety. And this only made me double down on this idea of that this was the book I wanted to bring into the world because I'm so honest about that. Like,
Mm.
this is truly my life. And
Mm.
I'm known for having this like meditation podcast.
Mhm.
And I didn't sleep for 4 days because I was so scared that when my son was a baby, I would just stand there over his bassinet, watching his little chest go up and down because I had such anxiety that if I slept or if I left or I went to the bathroom, that'd be the moment that something horrible would happen and I wouldn't be there to do something about it.
Yeah.
And it was so like debilitating that the way I deal with things is I try to learn as much about it as I possibly can. And so even though I knew a good amount about anxiety, and also I love to tell people this really is like this just shows you that like anxiety does not discriminate. Like
Mm.
you get the right circumstances, no matter who
Yeah.
you are, what you do, before you know it, you can, be
Mhm.
maybe, putting yourself at risk of postpartum psychosis because you're just like, well, I'm not going to sleep,
Mhm.
ever again. And so that's really what made me create my second book, which is called You Are Not Your Thoughts.
Mm.
And it helped me. It really was me recreating the process that I had to go through because I knew I wanted more children. So I was like, okay, I not only have to go through the postpartum anxiety in the now, but then I need to figure out how I can improve upon it for my next postpartum experience. Because
Mm.
I don't ever want to be so anxious that I don't sleep for 4 days on end. And,
Mhm.
I don't feel a need to do that ever again. It was bad enough the first time.
Yeah.
And so then when they asked for the second book, like, hey, what ideas do you have? This is the first thing where I was like, I really want to talk about this
Mm.
because even though my experience was really specific to postpartum anxiety, I think managing anxiety in general
Yeah.
is, it's so anyway, so it's the first part is very much meditation anxiety in the brain. You learn all about anxiety. And
Mhm.
then it's an 8-week journal. Each week has a different focus. The first one, you just get a picture of your anxiety. And then we kind of work through the process that I did. Then it's like just your body. How are you going to quiet down those
Mm.
signals from your body, your nervous system? If it's going red alert, you're
Mhm.
never going to be able to dig deeper into like what's actually going on here because your body is just in that total fight or flight state. And it just builds upon itself for 8 weeks. And every day has a meditation practice, a journal prompt that correlates to the meditation practice, and then a mantra you can use that day.
Mhm.
And each day is going to take you less than 20 minutes because we're busy. We've got stuff
Yeah.
to do. And research tells us that even like 10 to 15 minutes a day is enough to get the mental, physical, emotional benefits you need. So that's my second book, baby, which just
Mhm.
came out this in January.
Mhm.
But yeah,
Yeah,
so that's
that's
what inspired
amazing.
that one.
It's an amazing story, and I love that both of them were inspired by your own experiences. So, I'm sure people listening are going to be curious. How did you move through? Because this is with your first child, right?
This is with my first, and I am happy to report, everyone, this is not just a shameless plug for the book. However, my postpartum experience the second time around, totally different. Like
Yeah.
if my son was like a 12 out of 10, my daughter, like a 2 out of 10. I
Yeah.
still have moments, those intrusive thoughts, those like,
Yeah.
we all do, but it
Mhm.
totally different experience. And
Mhm.
for me, because I think the question that you were getting to is, how did I do
Yeah.
that?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so for me, it was a lot of it was in the prep work
Mm.
before I even gave birth. So being really honest with myself of being like, you know what? Last time I had a baby, this is what happened. And
Mhm.
looking at it objectively, not infusing any judgment in it, not saying, oh, I don't want to do that again because I was a
Mhm.
bad mom. No, none of that. Looking at that as if, you came to me, Karen, and you're like, oh, Kelly, I'm gonna have another baby. And last time I had such bad anxiety and I don't want to do that again. And I would not judge. I would be like, wow, like, of course you don't.
Mhm.
And so infusing love into that in my thoughts for myself. And then a lot of it was the prep work. So recognizing this is obviously something that I'm predisposed to. I've already experienced it. Talking openly about it. Um, and then being really proactive and starting to care for myself in pregnancy. So I trained for my postpartum experience in pregnancy, like a marathon runner, preps for a
Mm,
race, where you
mm,
start kind of building yourself up and, thinking about it, knowing that something might happen, focusing on nervous system work, meditation, journaling, all of that, making sure it's a daily practice and continuing to meditate even I remember my daughter's just a few hours old. She was napping in a little, hospital side bassinet. And I could feel myself, I still had all that adrenaline. I'd just given birth, being like, okay, I need to, focus on my nervous system, calm things down, do a little bit of meditation. I also practiced protected sleep this time around, which I did not before. And anyone who's not familiar with that practice, basically what it is it's a term that could apply to either parent. Usually it applies to mom, especially if mom is breastfeeding.
mm,
So when baby is really little, when they get up and they need to eat, mom needs to do that. So as soon as we introduced a bottle with my daughter around a month-ish, we started doing protective sleep, which for me meant sleeping in the spare bedroom with the white noise machine on. Because if I hear that baby cry, I'm going to have a physiological response to it. I'm going to be like, oh no, I need to go help my husband, or no, my mom, who helps us a lot. Oh no, maybe my mom needs help. So it's
mhm.
white noise on, noise canceling headphones in my ears, eye mask on, and it would be a certain window of 4 hours that
Yeah.
I needed to sleep. And that was huge. I didn't do that the first
Mm,
time around. We'd, maybe my husband and I would alternate off, but we were all in the same bedroom. So the baby was crying. I was still up. So
mhm,
practicing protected sleep
mm,
was huge, a total game changer. And then being really honest with myself, making sure that, even though you feel like you can't do anything at that time, even like once a week therapy, doing these things, truly preparing for the experience to make sure that it was different. And then having kind of trained for that for months
yeah.
before I even had that postpartum experience.
Mhm. Well, I mean, there's so much research out now about the benefits of sleep. And so, that whole area of expertise, and I mean, between apps on your phone and different sleep aids and mattresses and heavy blankets and all this, I mean, it's a whole thing now. So I can imagine, we know about the physiological impacts of not having sleep. So that protected sleep cocoon that you've created is important for your health. I mean, and that impacts the baby. So that
I
is
couldn't, yeah, I
a
couldn't
good
agree
thing.
more. And especially because I knew a lot of what I was experiencing, like when I had really bad anxiety with my son, that just meant I didn't sleep. And so I
Right,
had seen all too well what
right,
that, like, after having kids, I now understand why they use sleep deprivation as a form of torture.
right, right,
And, I just, that was something that we started doing. And I think the hardest part for it, honestly, was advocating for myself and
right.
telling my husband, not that he wouldn't do it. He did. He was
Mhm,
great. He was supportive, but I just had to speak up and say, hey, I need you to almost hold me accountable. Like, we just need to do this thing. And from 10 p.m. to 2 a.m. was usually our little
mhm,
window. If the
mhm,
baby gets up, I need you to deal with it. Anything after 2 a.m., if you want to wake me up, that's fine.
mhm.
But I need you to be on for these 4 hours, even if that means I go down for protected sleep at 9:59 p.m. and
Right,
then the baby wakes up at 2:01 a.m. Okay. But I had to speak up for myself and say what I needed. And a big piece of that, I didn't know what I needed the first time around.
right,
And when you're in that heightened state, when your anxiety is like a 12 out of 10, that's not the time you're really going to be able to speak up for yourself and even maybe realize what you need. You just know that you're red hot, high alert,
right.
and you need to just start calming that down.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I love intertwined with what you're bringing up is this kind of self-preservation, self-advocating message. And whether it's general mental health, I mean, certainly like with the Olympics just finishing up and Michael Phelps and, Simone Biles and her whole story of how she advocated for herself when she stepped out of the prior Olympics and here she is
Mhm.
back, and how she talked about, literally the morning that she won one of the gold medals, she was on a therapy session with her
Mhm.
therapist at 7 a.m. before she went off to the Olympic Village and then went off to the actual performance area. And she's just been so bringing it out into the forefront. So I love that that's not only what inspired you to write the book, but that you're so vocal about this topic. I don't know how many moms I have that listen to the podcast, moms with small kids, but I think the more you can get this message out through through this, through obviously your podcast it's just so important. It's just that theme of sticking up for yourself and caring for yourself. So thanks for
I
sharing that.
Oh, I appreciate that so much. And something, even if you don't have a lot of moms that are listening, something that I equally feel passionate about is helping yoga teachers or speaking on how quickly the thing that you teach that started as a thing that you love, that now has become your job, that you
Mm,
can fall out of love with it.
mm,
And
mm,
this reinvigoration of my meditation practice just for me and
mm,
my well-being, which is something, I started doing even before I, was teaching it. Same with yoga. My mom had to drive me to my first yoga class. I wasn't even old enough to drive. And it was something that I just loved. And that's what really inspires us to become teachers, right? When we think about when we'd go to the studio all the time and, we had our favorite teachers, all of that. And so quickly, once it becomes your job or you're teaching a million classes at once, or you've been writing a guided meditation for a podcast every week for 7 years, you can kind of forget why you loved it. And
mhm,
so being able to return to the thing that I love and let it be the thing that filled my cup once again was also really special, because then it reinvigorated my love for the practice,
mm,
because it's so easily, I don't know if you've ever experienced that, Karen, but I'm sure a lot of your listeners,
mhm.
that it's once you start teaching and you do it for a long time, or you start doing it a lot, you start getting burnt out. You're like, gosh, do I even love yoga anymore?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I often have conversations with teachers about, and this is kind of ties into what we were talking about before when you described the ethos behind, your brand. Um, just staying connected to what that purpose is, like what got you into teaching yoga in the first place and being really specific about it, because that is what infuses everything you do, the classes you teach, the if you do have other things, podcasting, whatever. Many of the yoga teachers that I work with are teaching classes. And so it's in the teaching of the classes that who you are and what you want to share is coming through. And for many teachers I talk to, they feel disconnected from even the sequences they're offering because they feel like that's something I was trained to teach. That's what I think my students want. Or maybe I have a certain idea about the sequence I'd like to teach, but when I go to teach, somebody will ask a question or somebody will say, oh, can we focus on this today versus that? And, it's kind of like the tail wagging the dog. And it's that similar to what you're talking about in terms of what you've gone through. It's that sense of, I'm going to put myself first. And as a teacher, ironically, if I put myself first and teach a sequence that really is something that I want to show up and do, it's actually going to be better for my students versus if I'm just sort of a cork in the ocean being swayed by different influences that are outside me. And then that does lead us to a place where, I've had teachers say, I don't even like the sequence I'm teaching. It's like, well, why are you teaching it? Well, that's what I thought I was supposed to be doing. And that again ties into when you said before, how you said to your husband, you need to give me this block of time. And I'm oftentimes saying to teachers, like, this is what it means to teach in an empowered way. You're stepping into your power when you decide this is the way I want to show up for people. This is what I'm going to offer people. This is the languaging I'm going to use, that sort of thing.
Oh, that's amazing.
Mm.
Yeah, I so much of that resonates with me. And I think, what a great gift you're giving people too of it almost sounds like in a way you're giving people permission
Well,
to
that, yes.
be themselves. Like authenticity, I think, especially in the teaching space, it speaks for itself. If you think about all of your favorite
Right.
teachers, they had their own kind of personality. They'd infuse their own kind of style into it. And I think what I'm hearing is that you're giving them all this great wisdom, all these great tools, and just giving them permission to do it their way.
Right. And that's the thing that I always find so interesting is that when we have these conversations, people will say, well, I didn't think I could do that, which essentially is I was waiting for permission or I thought somebody was in charge. And so the whole conversation gets into, well, who is in charge? Well, what do you mean? Well, you can do whatever you want. And it's this big reveal. And that is what creates that understanding that it's kind of like Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz. I had the power to go home the whole time. I just had to click my heels and I never even knew it. And when teachers realize this, then they really start to love again teaching because they're doing what they want. I'm kind of curious when you were telling that story before, this is just a one-off question. What do you think caused that massive spike in your podcast downloads?
Okay, I'll tell you exactly what it was. It was because everyone I was just chatting with someone about this, just a friend. And it kind of came together to me. Sometimes you process things out loud and then you're like, "Oh, that is it, isn't it?" What happened was everyone was at home. They were anxious, they were stressed. There
Mhm.
was this big push, if you remember at the beginning, of people saying, "Hey, you just keep some kind of a routine, anything. It'll be easy to just lay in bed all day, to, rot away, some kind of a routine. Get up, go for a little walk, drink some water, maybe meditate for a few days." And also, like, of course, we had such fear. Like,
Yeah.
I was so scared. I was like, what's happened? My husband was in residency. He was in the ICU
Mm,
March of 2020. I mean, intubating people left and right. I mean, I was pregnant with my first child. I did, so
crazy.
much fear.
Yeah.
And no one knew what was going on.
Mhm.
And so the thing is, I had already been doing the podcast for almost 3 years at that point. So it just so happened and I really do think this was like the universe looking out for me and also giving me a sign to keep going in this direction. This, little passion project of mine, of me just going into a closet, which, if, I'm still in a closet. It's a slightly different closet, but and making these guided meditations that came from my heart, that started as a way to just stay connected to my students back in Missouri 3 years prior. That's how I started it, is I'd record these meditations, and I didn't really know how to share an audio file. It sounds so
Right.
silly, but like 7 years ago, this is like, my podcast was older than Spotify. Like, it wasn't
Right.
on Spotify because it didn't exist. So figuring out, how do I share a guided meditation with people? I was like, I don't know, maybe I make a podcast. But anyways, everyone happened to go looking for the thing that I had just been, for funsies, making
Yeah.
for 3 years. And
Yeah.
then the universe gave me this beautiful blessing of, then my life changed. And
Mm,
that podcast changed my life.
mm,
And the thing that I had just been making for fun. And then, I had 3 years, whatever, once a week for 3 years, 150 guided meditations that are just free
mhm,
online, that people started doing. They started doing one once a day. There's all different topics. And so people just happened to all start looking for the thing that, just for fun, I had been making for years, and it was there. And
mhm.
at the same time, the universe was taking care of me, because I thought, oh my gosh, I just lost $12,000. I'm pregnant. I don't know what the future holds. I truly thought, okay, you know what? Yoga for you, it's been a good run. But
Yeah.
I thought, as many thought and many did have to close, I thought, this is
Mhm.
it. I'm going to have to, find something else to do, because this isn't working anymore. And right when I was having those thoughts, the universe said, no, no, look at this thing that ended up totally changing my life. But I really strongly believe that it was
Yeah.
because everyone just started looking. And
Yeah.
this was before even, I think, Insight Timer and all of that. I mean, people just were looking, and the algorithm had my back.
Mhm.
And,
That's cool. That's
as a
really,
little weirdo in a closet, I had
yeah.
all these things waiting for them.
Yeah, that's really cool. So, kind of a related question to what we were talking about before, especially because when you describe the style of yoga you were teaching when you had your studio, and what you train teachers now on, restorative, yoga nidra, kind of the slower, more gentle. Because again, this is another topic of conversation I have a lot. Teachers nowadays are going there's so many teacher trainings there, and a lot of teachers are going to trainings without doing a lot of due diligence, not through any fault of their own. They're just sort of scrolling on the Yoga Lines website, or they see something on Instagram and they sign up, and then they take this training and they realize, like, 3 weeks in, I don't even really like this style. Like, geez, I wish I did a little more research. This doesn't really resonate with me as the kind of yoga I want to offer people. And so when I meet them, if they enroll in my program as sort of a post 200-hour thing, we start to go back to kind of the beginnings. Well, what kind of teacher do you want to be? What kind of yoga do you want to offer? So how did you decide that this particular path or avenue or type of yoga, this sort of amalgam, how did you decide that was for you?
Part of it was a business decision. It was like part business decision and part I enjoyed it. I started with like vinyasa. I jokingly in my 200-hour teacher training, they joked, they were like, "Oh, you just look like yoga Barbie." Like when I taught my last, my final class to get that piece of paper saying
Yeah.
I did it. Oh, I just like, had this cute little outfit and all I wanted to teach was like power yoga. Like
Mhm.
I wanted to, get in there and my background was in sports. I was a college athlete, all of that. And so I was really comfortable in teaching like an advanced, like power
Yep.
yoga. That's where I started being comfortable. Then, and I started teaching that way. Then when I moved to Missouri and I started having students that were like, oh no, 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 I'm not here to learn how to flow from an arm balance into, an intense inversion. I just want to tie my own shoes. Then
Mm.
that not only challenged me as a teacher to start exploring that softer side, but I
Mhm.
also really started liking it. I did take a 300-hour teacher training after my 200-hour teacher training that focused more on restorative yoga nidras and the softer
Mhm.
sides. And that influenced it as well. But the thing that really, this is my very honest answer, at the time, I felt like there's so many, like vinyasa was the thing 10
Mhm.
years ago.
Mhm. Mhm.
And it's still really popular, but no one was really teaching. And this is the ADHD part of me. I love a hyperfixation. If I decide that I'm really interested in restorative yoga, which I did, I'll go do the trainings. I'll read the books. I'll spend hours and years learning about this to then be able to pull out the relevant bits and put together a weekend course for someone who's already a vinyasa teacher and just wants the foundations of like, how can I incorporate restorative yoga into what I'm doing or start teaching restorative yoga? I know that's one of my strong suits is to do the hyperfixation so then I can give people what they need in a realistic time frame. And so part of it was a business decision too, was that I did the hyperfixations. I learned how to teach these things. And then so many of my peers and my students and people who do my 200-hour teacher training, they're like, but when are you going to teach us how to do restorative yoga?
Mhm.
Or studio owners that would come to me and be like, I want to put restorative yoga on the
Yeah.
schedule, but I don't know anyone who will teach it. Same with yoga nidra, even
Mhm.
meditation. And so it's always been a combo of what I love and what I personally found to be interesting.
Mhm.
And I firmly believe anyone who's designing like a course or a training, anything like that, listen to what people are asking you for.
Mm.
Because if there's something, even if you don't consciously be like, oh, people kind of know me for the guided meditations I do in Shavasana or whatever it is, there is something that people know you for or are intrigued by. And you'll start hearing, if you pay attention, you'll start hearing these little requests, these little questions, these inquiries, and
Mm.
then lean into that.
Mm.
So that's kind of how I made my informed decision of like, well, I love this thing. I definitely know enough about it to
Yeah.
put together a course and people are asking for it. So then I just made what people were asking for and they're like, great. And then they took it.
Mhm. Mhm. And so for someone listening who this whole conversation like hits home for them, what would you what kind of advice would you give them if they've been teaching for a little bit, but it doesn't feel like it might feel a little bit like a square peg in a round hole. They don't feel like they've sort of found their groove. How can they kind of find their authentic way of teaching? What might be something they could do?
Mm. Okay, a couple of things come to mind. One, have someone, this is going to be a little vulnerable. Okay, so everyone who's like, oh, vulnerable is tough, that's okay. I encourage you to do it. Ask the people around you that you know and trust that are close to you. You can either just ask them, like, hey, what do you feel like my strengths are? It's also a really nice exercise because the people who are close to you and love you, they're not gonna, say anything hurtful to you. Invite some of those people to your class and
Mhm.
ask them, does this seem like me? Or
Mm.
ask them, like, you know me really well. Am I me when I'm teaching or it's something you notice? The reason I say this is something that one of my best friends now, we started with a working relationship. We're best friends now. Something she told me when she first met me on a retreat, it was one of our first retreats together. We'd planned this retreat for like a year and then we finally met in person. And I asked her at the end of the retreat, I was like, I'm so curious, but we've been working together in kind of this online capacity and you know me from the internet. Like I don't know, am I what you thought I
Mm.
would be? And she was like, it's funny because not really. You come across as so serious online. And when I was first starting, I did. I was very, very, very serious. And I know it was because when I was young, I was in my mid 20s, I wanted to be taken seriously. And I felt like to be taken seriously, you needed to be extremely serious.
Mm,
And I am kind of a jokester. I like to be silly sometimes. I want things to be lighthearted. It
mm,
doesn't always have to be so serious. And she was like, I feel like you need to let people see that side of you a little bit.
mm.
And she was
Interesting.
totally right. And ever since I took that advice of her and she knew me and I trusted her, and she's still a close friend, but have those people who love you take your class and basically ask them, like, does this seem like me? And they might have some really insightful feedback for you of like,
Mhm.
it's you do seem really serious. And like, we know that you're a little bit more lighthearted, or, it's interesting because you're teaching hot vinyasa yoga. And like, we know that you don't like the heat or whatever it is. They might
Yeah.
give you some insight. So that's one piece of advice. Another piece of advice is do a kind of ask yourself, if you're teaching, let's say at a studio, do my values and what I want to teach align with what I'm being allowed to teach at this studio? It's not to
Oh,
say where you're teaching is bad at
right.
all. Every student, but there's a lot of studios out there. There's a lot of yoga teachers out there. It really is, having both been a studio owner and also a teacher that's worked for other people's studios. It's about finding that right relationship.
Hmm.
And do I feel like I can show up and teach in the way that's authentic to me, the style that's authentic to me in this place? Yes or no?
Yeah.
Asking some of those tough questions. And then if you've done all of that and you're still feeling a little bit lost, go just practice some yoga for fun.
Mm,
Let it be fun again and
mm.
see what that is.
Yeah.
Might not be what you've been teaching, and just
Yeah.
let it be fun. Go be a student, and then that might give you some guidance.
Yeah, that's really great advice, especially that second point you made. I have often had conversations with teachers who feel like they're teaching someplace and there are some rules and restrictions over how the studio owner wants yoga to be portrayed in their studio. And the teacher will feel backed up against a wall. It's you always have a choice, right? And you might make a choice in the near term to stay at that studio for financial reasons, for experience reasons, and at the same time, you're going to be looking for something else. And I think what you said is recognizing that, knowing first what is your true north, what is your way that you want to show up. And if this is a place that's asking you to do something a little differently, and you make the decision, like you're driving the car, you're making the decision, when I'm at this place, I'm going to do it this way in adherence to the rules. I have work I'm doing behind the scenes to find my own gig someplace else where I can have a little more freedom, or maybe it makes sense for me to stay there because it's a big community and I get good exposure. Like, all of those can be good outcomes. It's not like you have to say, out of integrity, I'm going to quit. There can
Yeah,
be, it's just, I think sometimes the freedoms that we have as independent yoga teachers, we don't always take advantage of that freedom. We're kind of still like, this is the permission conversation. We're kind of still thinking we have to do it a certain way when we can do it our way. That's part of the fun of this.
100%. And I love that you're highlighting that. And to piggyback off of it, I feel like also for studio owners, if there's any that's listening,
Yeah.
it's also okay to, I'm not saying like, go fire your staff. That's not at all what I'm saying. But if you have a teacher that comes to you and let's say you have a, I don't know, whatever, again, a hot vinyasa
Right.
studio, and someone comes to you and they're like, you know what I'm really passionate about? Yin yoga. I love yin yoga. I want it done traditionally in the cool room, first thing in the morning, all of that. And that doesn't happen to align with your vision, your true north as the studio owner. That's also okay.
Yeah.
And realizing that it's really about finding that sweet spot. And most studio owners started as teachers, most of them, not all of them.
Yeah.
And so finding that sweet spot and also empowering your teachers to teach in a way that's authentic to them, because that's always going to serve your
Totally.
greater good.
Mhm.
But recognizing that when a teacher's vision may be different than your vision, that it's just not the right teacher to studio match, and that is okay. It
Yeah.
goes both ways.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting too, because sometimes, and this was said to me by my first teacher, you can't be the yoga teacher for everybody. So as
Mhm.
teachers, we can't go out there teaching thinking we want everybody to like our classes. And even in a way, we can't control if they like them. That's really for them, it's their subjective experience. Um, so maybe kind of as we wrap this up, maybe the final piece, I'd love to know what's ahead for you? Like we are in the middle of 2024. We're recording this in August of 2024. Um, how do you kind of see going into the last part of this year and maybe into next year? Like what's ahead for you?
So honestly, what I'm most looking forward to is getting back into it, getting back into the swing of things. So I
Mhm.
guess bringing this like full circle to what we started talking about at the beginning of
Yep.
how do we navigate change and these different seasons and all of that. I've really been working on embracing that. I mean, everything is temporary and
Yep.
that there are true like ebbs and flows to everything. So as I'm in, the troll hole, my postpartum period, as I'm living in the troll hole, knowing that's temporary. And even though it's still uncomfortable and hard sometimes because I'm like, oh my gosh, as I've really had to scale back after my second baby, I know that there'll be a time where I'll ramp back up again.
Sure.
And, and so for me, I'm just getting really excited. Even having this conversation, I think when I sent you an email, because
Hmm.
I slid into, Karen's inbox and I said, hey, what's up? Do you ever want to talk again? Even
Yeah.
trying to be intentional, like it just feels so good to like talk
Yeah.
to another yoga teacher
Yeah.
about the thing that we love.
Yeah.
And
Totally.
that just feels so good. And so for me, it's stepping back into the light
Yeah.
of doing what I'm doing, but
Yeah.
then doing more of it. Now that my youngest is getting a
Hmm.
little more self sufficient, she's going to be one before I know it. My oldest is starting preschool. Then it's like, okay, I'm just getting back into the swing of things. So
Yeah.
I have a retreat in October, one
Oh,
in May of next year. I don't have any books on the docket right now, but just infusing new life into my
mm.
podcast, just doing the things that I was
Yeah.
doing. And it feels like, you put on, again, talking about cleaning out your closet, but when you put on like that pair of jeans that just feels like so good, and maybe you haven't worn them for like a while, but then you put them on and you're like, oh yeah, that's
Yeah.
always my favorite pair of jeans. Like right now, teaching and all
Yeah.
that, that's what it feels like for me.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. And it's so great you have like the maturity and the wisdom to kind of ride the waves of where you are in your life. And so, yeah, like you had this sort of incubator phase when you had your second child, and now you're kind of emerging from that, and you're sort of in a way touching back on things that you love. And yet in this new reincarnation, I'm sure it will look a little different, and you'll have all that you'll bring from your experience of life to everything, the podcast and the retreat and all of that. So let people know, let's just kind of cover a couple of things. So the podcast, tell us again the name of the podcast,
Yes.
Mindful.
So mindful in minutes. So
Yep.
that's the big mama that has 7 years worth of
Yep.
weekly meditations on there. And
Got it.
then the second one is called Meditation Mama. That's guided meditation specifically if you're in the fertility, prenatal, or postpartum phase of your life.
And that's the book.
That's my second podcast. I'm a
Oh,
dual
so you
podcaster. Did I ever
podcast.
tell you that?
Okay. I didn't know that. Okay. So
Yes,
there's the
there's
original
two.
podcast, which is called
Mindful in minutes.
Mindful,
In minutes.
Mindful in Minutes. And then the
Yep.
second podcast, somehow we
Is
missed in the conversation.
yes.
There was another
It's
podcast.
Yes, it's called Meditation Mama. So it's just a spin-off of the first, but it only has meditation practices specifically for fertility, prenatal, and postpartum. I started it when I was pregnant with my first, and we were in lockdown, and I had a lot
Okay.
of time on my hands. I was like, well, let's do a spin-off.
Okay. Cool. Okay. So you've got those two. And then the books, the two
Yes,
books, we talked
two
about
books.
those.
So Meditation for the Modern Family is
Yep.
the first one, and then You Are Not Your Thoughts. Both
Right.
are available anywhere you get books. You Are Not Your Thoughts is in Whole Foods. You can pick them on Amazon, Target, yeah, all the places.
Got it. Okay. And then tell people about the retreat.
Yeah, so I have a retreat in Iceland in October 5th through 10th. It's called
Mhm.
Auroras and Awakenings.
Mhm.
And so we're going to go see the Northern Lights,
Nice.
do all the fun things. And then I have next May in Scotland, the Wild and Wondrous Woman Retreat,
Oh,
where we're
cool.
going to go and have fun and just, connect with our feminine divine. And we do yoga, meditation, we do tours. It's like the best of both worlds of
Yeah.
like a yoga retreat. And also you get to be a tourist at the same time.
Yeah, that's always great. I mean, I've been on a bunch of retreats and I never get to do any fun stuff because we're always like with books. And, I remember I
Yes.
went to Spain and I never saw Spain. We were just in the yoga room for 7 days. And I went home and I thought, that is such a bummer. Like next time I
Yeah.
go someplace international, so I love the idea of a hybrid. When I went to Italy last year, it was a hybrid. So that was nice. You could do things during the day and the yoga
It's
practice
really
in
fun.
the morning.
Mhm.
And yeah, so that's great. So how do people find out about the retreat if they're interested in getting more details?
Yeah, so they can just go to my website, yogaforyouonline.com.
Okay.
Everything's there, the retreats, the books, the podcasts.
Yeah, that's always like the one
That's
stop.
like the hub.
Yeah,
And then you
that's
can
the hub.
click around and find what you're looking for.
Perfect. Okay, great. Well, I'm so glad we had a chance to reconnect. Two babies later, two people later, you had two whole people between last time and this time, which is
Oh
just
gosh.
incredible.
Thank you.
And I just say let's just keep in touch, and we'll do another one, and we'll maybe when you come back from your retreat, we can have a regrouping and hear how that went and talk again.
Oh, that'd be amazing. Thank you so much for having me on and sharing this space with me.
Yes, for sure. This will go live on Monday, and I will send you. Oh yeah,
Cool.
we're right on top of it here. So
You
yeah,
are. I
we'll
love
go
it.
go live on
And
Monday, and
when
yeah,
is your birthday?
my birthday is September 29th. I will be 60 years old.
Yes, oh my gosh, are you doing anything fun for it?
Well, I actually just Ben and I just planned a trip to Paris in October, so that's going to be. Yeah,
Amazing.
I've been there years ago, many years ago, but all this Olympic watching, like midway through the Olympics, I looked at him and I'm like, we need to see how many miles we have on our credit cards, our JetBlue credit cards, and we need to go to Paris. And I actually had been following this woman on TikTok who's an American, but she lives in Paris, and she has like a travel consultancy she does for people.
Cool.
So I had a consult call with her, and she gave me some recommendations for hotels, and we ended up getting a ticket on miles, and I booked the hotel that this woman recommended. And it's just going to be a short trip, but that's going to be my birthday present. Yeah.
Amazing. I hope you have the best time.
Oh yeah, we picked a hotel where it has a balcony and it looks right out onto the Eiffel Tower. And I've already gone on Instagram and TikTok, and the hotel has pictures of the rooms, and they literally, like, you go out on the
Cool.
balcony and the Eiffel Tower is right there. So yeah, so I'm looking forward to that. So that'll be a
Amazing.
nice
Oh,
thing.
that's so great. That's so great. It was also
Yeah.
good to chat with you. And I really, truly, I mean what I say. I think all the work that you're doing, but I think especially the anatomy work is just so needed. And the way that you do it, I think is exemplary.
Oh, thanks for mentioning that. I appreciate it. All right. Well, we will talk again soon, and I'll send you this on
Okay.
Monday.
Amazing. I'll make sure to share it everywhere. Okay.
Okay. Take care. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for being here with me today. I hope you enjoyed it. And hey, one more thing. While I don't know you personally, I know what a yoga teacher looks like who's ready to work with me. She's ready to take action. She's looking for someone who has the answers she needs. She knows she's worth the investment. She can't wait to get all her prep time back. And she's excited to make a positive change. If that's you, DM me the words podcast offer to my Instagram, and I will give you a special incentive to work with me inside my signature program. My Instagram handle is Bare Bones Yoga. I can't wait to hear from you.